So welcome, everyone. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and I'm the host of the Mind Matters podcast. And we have some wonderful guests with us today who have agreed to share their experiences and thoughts about working with gifted and twice exceptional kids in the online world. So first, I'd like for our panel to introduce themselves. So Lynn, why don't you start for us?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lynn Henwood. I am the head of school for Flex School, which is a twice exceptional school, school for 2E and gifted children. I was teaching gifted and talented in New Jersey for about 8 years before I took on this new role. And I'm also president of the New Jersey Association for Gifted Children.
Sarah, how about you?
Hi, I'm Sarah Lovetso. I am the founder and director of Ascend Micro School. We're a small, modern one-room schoolhouse in Colorado. And I've been in the gifted field for a while. I also currently have my 5-year-old at home with me. She's a profoundly gifted little one and goes to school with me every day and everything like that. So that's me.
Awesome. And Meredith?
Hello, my name is Meredith Wisniewski, and I teach for Phelps Center for Gifted Education in Springfield, Missouri. I am part of one of our 2 programs called the Springfield Scholars Program, which is actually a full-time middle school program that is housed at a local high school. I am also the vice president of the Gifted Association of Missouri.
And last but not least, Lisa.
I'm Lisa Van Gammert, and I'm a gifted my favorite title is the ambassador of the gifted. So I'm a former youth and education ambassador for Mensa, and I focus on the needs of gifted students by training teachers and writing and speaking. And awesome. Most people know me from my website, Gifted Guru.
Very cool. And I love it because I kind of put out the call to do this roundtable. And we had a wide variety and range of people who volunteered because I feel like we have a really good mix here of different people with different backgrounds working with different students and educators. And I think that'll be really helpful for our conversation. So why don't we start? And, you know, a lot of us have kind of been thrown into the deep end of the pool with the online learning thing with our kids. And I'm curious about your perspectives on how gifted kids' needs, whether or not, how do their needs shift when we're doing at-home schooling as opposed to in-person schooling? Are the needs the same or have they changed?
One thing I think that we have to separate out is the difference between the students who have always been schooled at home, like homeschooled gifted children are having a very different response than children who are used to going to school and who are now at home. So I think those 2 groups are going to have different needs. And so I think that's one of the things we have to focus on, because the children who have been used to going to school, they may find that they prefer this. They can work at their own pace. They don't have to wait for anybody. They may find that they're in fewer confrontations or uncomfortable conversations because of that. Like they don't have the interpersonal struggle that they often have if they're maybe in a mainstreamed classroom and just like cluster gifted, or maybe the only gifted child in the class or school. They may be having a better time with that, and yet that conflict may have transferred to them vis-a-vis their parents. And so now where they used to be, they would go to school and have conflict and come home and have like a cocoon of safety and protection and relaxation. Now that's transferred to the home. And so I think that this population that we're talking about, these kids are complex, and there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all description of how they're reacting to it. But I do think it's going to be very different for those who are used to leaving the home to go to school versus those who are used to schooling at home all the time.
First of all, I want to say thank you for the differentiation between the idea of homeschooling versus learning at home. My husband was homeschooled growing up, so that's been one of his things is really talking about the difference between those things. I think for my kids, I'm noticing that there's more of a reminder that they have those academic needs that people sometimes forget. oh, you're gifted, you'll figure it out, right? Like, oh, you should have this online thing super easy because you'll just get it done in 5 minutes. And, and for a lot of our kids, it's a really good reminder that we are there for that support. We are there to help them with those questions and with those things that they need. And a lot of them are really struggling right now because they don't have that one trusted teacher that they can go, okay, I can ask you this and I'm not going to be embarrassed because I'm asking you this. My regular teacher would kind of give me a look, but you get it. So I think for a lot of them, they're feeling really unmoored right now because they don't have that thing that they need. So even though the work for some of them is quote unquote easy, I think for a lot of them, there's really nothing easy about it. And that's something I'm really noticing with my students.
Yeah, I've also noticed that they really kind of thrive from that discussion that they have with like-minded peers. And if they're not on a video platform for most of their classes, that's something that's really lacking. So the work itself, they might get it done really quickly, but they're not really able to go into depth with it because they can't bounce their ideas off of each other and, raise that level of abstraction and depth and complexity because they're just sort of probably whipping it out and then they're bored the rest of the day.
Our school is a hybrid school, so we're in session 3 days a week and then the kids are homeschooled 2 days a week. So we very much see the blend of what you were talking about, Lisa, with having it's an interesting combination for them because they're used to being at school 3 days a week and then 2 days a week being home. So the being home isn't as weird to them, but also the social interaction is really hard. A lot of our students, while we're not a school for the gifted, most of our students are gifted or twice exceptional, and just finding a place where they were understood, which could be a gifted program or like-minded peers at school. But at our school, a lot of kids have come to us after being at multiple schools, trying homeschooling and everything, and they finally found a place where they felt understood and had peers that they trusted and loved, and now they're at home. And we do video conferencing and classes for every day of the week now, but it's still, they're missing out on just being in the presence of their friends. We are also in a forest, so we play a lot outside and there's just a lot of imaginative play, and that just really doesn't happen online. And the academics are fine, like they're all progressing, but for the gifted kiddos, like, and even as a mom to a gifted kiddo, it's just really different to not have the peers when you're used to having them and you're used to it being a safe place to socialize.
Yeah,
I feel the exact same way. We also have kept our structure. So our routine, we're still on from 8 to 3. They get more breaks and things like that. And they have like lunch off and the teachers try to have them have off-screen opportunities. And we still have our community gatherings in the morning. We all get together in like a homeroom where, replicating what we did at school, where they'd come in and just sit around and chat. So we try to do that. But like you said, Sarah, it's still not the same. And some of these kids are really feeling isolated at this point because the same thing, they all came to us not feeling very positive about school, not feeling success in school, not feeling like they ever had a friend or had a place that they fit. So they finally got that this year. This is our first year in my location. And now all of a sudden that's been sort of ripped away. So it's been really hard for a lot of them social, emotionally, wise.
Yeah, it sounds like what I hear everyone saying is maybe not so much that their needs have changed, but the way that we're meeting those needs has shifted, and whether or not we are meeting those needs. I feel like, so in essence, the amount of engagement, that maybe if they were sitting in the classroom, they would have some of those social needs fulfilled, and now they're not. And so we have to find a way to modify that.
One of the things that I noticed that I've been hearing from both students and some teachers is that districts, in an attempt not to overburden families, which I think is a worthy goal, recognizing that unless you are a homeschooler and you're used to that dynamic, if you're a parent who's used to sending your children to school and then now you're thrust into the role of teacher, it's a very different thing. that the districts are trying to make sure they're not putting too much pressure on the parents by having fewer assignments for students to do. But with our population, that isn't necessarily the best thing, right? And so I had this very uncomfortable conversation that was being recorded where a district was saying, well, we're only allowed to do X. And I'm like, yeah, that's just, you can't stop differentiation just because you're now delivering it through a different medium. And that when our kids' brains are spinning around with all of the possibilities of everything that's going on, right? Like they're not home because summer vacation started early, right? And our kids can figure out they can extrapolate all of this data in their minds because of their ease with this abstraction. And they can take that to very dark places. And we need to occupy their minds more. Now, not with more work. I'm not saying like give them more task cards and give them more, but we need to make sure that the complexity of work that they're being asked to do occupies their mind and gets their minds a little tired so that they don't have all that mental energy to over process and over analyze all the other stuff that's going on in the world because they weren't burning up that mental energy with academic learning. And I think too many districts have swung too far the wrong way for our kids. Maybe what's right for most kids, but for our kids, they need to burn mental energy just like all kids need to burn physical energy. And if they don't burn it, well, there's a quote from a novelist that says, "A little boredom is a dangerous thing on a small island." And I think what we're finding with a lot of families is a little boredom is a dangerous thing in a quarantined home. When the boredom is in the hands of a gifted kid, it's like Ferris Bueller on steroids. And it's exhausting for everyone.
Yeah, I would say also, well, as we first started getting into this, I've got my 3 kids home. And so the 2 older ones are twice exceptional. They're both gifted and ADHD. And then the younger one is supposed to go into kindergarten next year, so no official diagnoses, but we can all see the writing on the wall. And all of a sudden, it was this 4-year-old, well, he's almost 5, but was staying up till 10 and 11 o'clock at night, and he's just up in his bed, and he's just talking away because, again, both the physical energy, but also that mental energy, like it was just very difficult to keep him engaged while we're trying to help the kids with the at-home schooling, and we're trying to continue our jobs and businesses. And so, I agree with that, Lisa, what you're saying. Let's go on. So here's my next kind of prompt and question, and that is, what are some of the ways that you have found to connect with your kids or help them connect, or just creative ways of teaching that maybe, for example, for me, I've always really been very stubbornly resistant to doing any type of online counseling, especially for kids. I just felt like it's not appropriate developmentally. We need to be in person. It's not the same when you're online. And then I kind of got, pushed into it, whether I wanted to or not. And I have found that some really great benefits to it. So, for example, like kids are sometimes even more comfortable when they can talk to me when they're in their own space, when they're not at my office. They're actually able to open up more easily. Some of my clients, it seems like they feel more comfortable talking just because there is that screen between, so it's a little bit safer. And so, and also just some ways to kind of integrate the technology. And, what's the phrase about, invention, what is it?
It's the mother
necessity.
Necessity.
Yeah, thank you.
Mother of invention.
Thank you. I'm like, there's a necessity and invention and something there, but it's like, it forces you to be creative. It forces you to look at things in a new and different way. So what are some of the things that you've found that have been useful and helpful?
We have so many things we've kind of started utilizing because of this. And like you said, it's kind of like the creative constraints, make you actually more creative. So we use a lot of the technology, the Drive. The teachers have been making folders for the kids and having individual agendas, which are similar yet differentiated in each folder. And the other kids don't know what everyone has. So, there are points where they can come together for discussion, but a lot of them are either processing the content differently at different levels. And then we still have the choice where they have products they can choose, ways to show mastery that are different. And we try to give them creative choices or let them come up with their own. So, for example, they were studying the Gilded Age in history, and they all chose a different person from the time period to research and then kind of research that person's role within the historical context. And then they had to play the role of the person. So they went around their house, they found anything that they could to create a costume to look like the person. They used the accents, and then they went on the virtual platform and they did kind of like The View or some kind of like news panel, modern day, but as if these characters came to life from the past. And they created questions for each other, and they had the best time. So I think that there are definitely ways we can still be creative. We still do gym class, but we let kids take turns leading meditations or leading workout routines, or we try to keep it fun, creative, and the structure with the flexibility within the structure, but like the routine that they so much crave.
Yeah, trying to keep some consistency.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we do a lot of similar things when we have learning menus for each of the kids. I imagine our schools, while I'm sure very different, have similarities because we do all individualized learning plans for each and every child. And so we use Google Drive, like you just said, too, to create a learning menu and have every child's learning things there that parents can access and kids can access. So that's been really helpful, I think. And like parents understanding that we've been really big on communicating that for our kids, that learning, of course, is important, but we want them to feel safe and we want them to feel just okay emotionally, and to make sure that they don't push their kids too much, because that's something that with homeschooling combined with being basically just being in a hybrid school, the parents send them to us and we do most of the instruction, and then at home they typically do most of the enrichment or practice. And so it's like flip-flopped. We deliver the lessons, but the parents are doing everything else. That's really the only way they can. So we do have office hours, and teachers basically get online to help with schoolwork, which most of the time it turns into a lot of kids getting on and just like wanting to talk to us, which is really, really fun and honestly probably better for their mental health. And then we've been doing science online and science experiments, and they're all really excited to see things being lit and on fire in my house. And so that's fun too. But trying to be creative and still focus on the togetherness that comes with being at school, even though we're apart.
Yeah, I think that togetherness has really been key. We're finding, particularly in Missouri and in our districts, that there's a lot of range as to how flexible we can be. I'm in a district where, especially because my kids are part of traditional curriculum, even though it's compacted, they still have those learning standards that they need to meet, as opposed to our other program where it's the 1 day a week, it's the enrichment, it's the pullout. So there's a lot more flexibility there because they were already on that track. And so we're having to find ways to meet those needs and be creative and give the students that outlet. But we're also kind of being reminded, hey, some of your students are earning high school credit right now, and they still have to earn that credit. And so that's been really, really hard for a lot of our kids. And some of them have had to prioritize and say, even though we love what we're doing in your classes, I've got this teacher who's telling me that I need to do this thing because I need to earn this credit. And so we're having to show a lot of grace in that prioritizing. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we can do is, yes, we want to be there for you and we want to, feed your brain and do all of those things. But I think, as we've already kind of alluded to, we're having to feed their emotion and feed that security a little bit more. We try to meet with our kids online as well. It's completely optional. Right now, our district has said everything is optional, and some of our kids, it needs to be optional. They don't feel like they can do that right now, but they know that it's there for them. Last Friday, we had a meeting where it somehow evolved into everybody having their favorite stuffed animals, even though our like too cool for school 6th grade boys, like there was one, he just kind of like subtly slid it over and kind of flashed it on the screen and then put it away. So really that connection piece has been above all else. And we've kind of figured everything else will come with time. But as long as we know that we're reaching them in that way, it's like, okay, phew, that makes us feel a little bit better that at least we're doing something for them. But yeah, that balance is a real struggle right now.
So I inadvertently stumbled into a bunch of new technology in order to make this happen. So I didn't know what I was getting myself into, which so much of my life begins with that sentence. But, I had spent a Friday working on a article on like resources for learning from home. Of course, that was before I knew this was going to last longer than an extended spring break, right? Like, so I'm a big believer in the idea of begin as you intend to go on. But the difficulty with that here is that we have not known from day to day what tomorrow would look like. And that has added a pressure, right? But then the next day, I woke up in the morning on a Saturday and decided, oh, I need to teach a secondary English class online. Like there's nothing for secondary students really, not that much. And far easier to find things to occupy an 8-year-old than to occupy a 17-year-old. And so I started doing this. And so I've been using YouTube, so the platform, I've been using YouTube to live stream this class, and it requires a third-party platform as well. But what really surprised me was I offered these writing opportunities and they would share it into Google Drive and I would evaluate them. And it just shocked me how many kids were submitting writing when, of course, there's no grade and there's no credit and they just want it to be evaluated. And as the class has gone on, they've built this whole community. So they get so excited every time the class is to jump in. They're like, I'm first. And then as the different kids come in, they're so excited to quote unquote see each other. And they created an email chain among themselves. So now they have this big group email that I'm not a part of at all and don't want to be. But they've got this whole thing going on. But they're still craving. So they were begging for class on the weekend. They're sad that we don't have class. They want more, and they constantly contact me about wanting more. And it's been such an eye-opener to me about how much we don't understand the mind of children, and that we think one thing about how they learn and we think one thing about how they feel about their learning. But I've learned from this that they crave connection and they need a lot more connection when it's digital because it is not the same. I mean, there are benefits, of course, but I think one of the things we've learned from this is no matter how beautiful your technology, no matter how seamless, no matter how fantastic, there's something about being in a space, a physical space with somebody. It's almost the difference between reading a physical book and reading on a device. It's not that, some people really prefer one or the other, but they're a very different experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's very tactile. And that's what, some of our students, when they're together, it's different too, just kind of like reading facial expressions and just the I don't know, there's not really a word for it that I can think of, but just the physical presence, like you said. And, sometimes just a light touch that a child or one girl likes to play with her friend's hair. And I think those are really important. And those are really missing right now. And I know a lot of kids and adults are struggling with that as well.
Yeah, the sensory input that I think comes with being in a classroom environment is lacking. I'll have students laying in the grass listening to our class and things like that, but we do a lot of design thinking at our school, and that's near impossible to do collaboratively with kindergarten to fifth graders online. It really is. And so we're encouraging families to do that together, but it's not the same, because the social bonding that comes with working on a really hard problem over a period of a couple weeks is really, really valuable and teaches so much more than just the learning goals for a gifted child, when they have to learn perseverance, which can be hard. They have to learn how to fail and try again. And those things don't come as easily when they're with their parents, because parents, I mean, again, I'm a parent and I swoop in. I think all of us do. And so it's hard to like let your child falter, really. And at school, we're able to do that as teachers, but it's different when they're home, and there's just a lot it feels like they're missing out on by just not being together.
I think that mentioning that sensory piece is really important. It reminds me of the, bonding with newborns, right, when they're first born, and that oxytocin that you get from that physical touch, and just being in that same space and really being able to look in someone's eyes and connect with them and see what's going on with them. And then the other part of it is, I know for me, I enjoy doing a variety of creative, whatever projects of different types. And one of the things that I went through that I don't have time for anymore was scrapbooking. And I like doing the scrapbooking, and I like, because I love photography, it kind of gave me an outlet for my enjoyment of photography. And so then I would, do the physical manifestation of the pages. And my husband, who's a little bit of a technophile, as you can kind of see with all of the, things, he goes, why don't you just do digital scrapbooking? And because it's not the same, I need something to do with my hands. And it's a physical experience. And that's how kids are, whether they're writing on paper and pencil, or they're doing a hands-on experiment, or just moving around the classroom. If you're sitting there at a laptop, you're not getting that. And I don't know that there's a way really to recreate that in the same way that I have found.
So we have been, because we just got a new student who's dyslexic. He's very, very visual spatial. And I knew that he was not going to get as much out of his math class if he was just doing something online. So we've been working on, I actually looked to see if something existed. I don't know if anyone has any suggestions, but I was looking for some kind of book or workbook that also has a physical piece to it. So we created our own, where, like whatever skill he's learning, he's got to go around his house and collect something like Cheerios to use, for manipulatives and things like that. Or he has to cut different shapes out for categorizing. So just that we're still trying to keep that physical aspect as much as possible, because it is important for tactile learners especially.
So I do have a suggestion there. So the Orton-Gillingham method for dyslexia, there's a specific method for that with math that's multisensory. So if you just search for math resources, Orton-Gillingham, often abbreviated just OG math. I think I'm glad you brought up that one anecdotal student, because I think that's true of a lot of gifted students who aren't dyslexic. They just get that multimodality. They like experiencing things in lots of different ways. So I find that working with gifted kids, oftentimes resources that were created for students with disabilities are often perfect for the overly abled.
Yeah, speaking of those twice exceptional kids, let's talk about that specific population here for just a moment. And I'm curious, what obstacles have you found, and what accommodations and modifications have you found that have been useful during this transition?
Well, speaking of Orton-Gillingham, it was kind of a difficult transition to do it virtually, to do the Orton-Gillingham. So our specialist found online a special kind of camera that you can plug into your computer. And I guess you show the flashcards or whatever it is, and the student can see it, because before it was opposite when she tried to show it on the screen. So that was sort of defeating the purpose. So things like that. But one of the things that I think is difficult, Emily, meeting their needs, is especially that social emotional, because some of our kids, they have the anxiety or whatever it may be, where when we're present with them, I can walk by and pull them out and just have a few moments with them, or they can go sit and take a break and come back. Or maybe even another student supports them, but they have that physical support there to help them through. And that's really missing. You know, if a student is upset, they'll maybe click off their camera or they'll mute, and we don't know how they're doing. We have no way of knowing how they're doing. One thing we do is we have a counselor kind of who has her own virtual room set up that we can send the child to, but the child's not necessarily going to go. So I find that is one thing that I really miss, is just being able to be there for them when they need support, social emotional support especially.
A lot of the parents, a lot of times don't, as much as some of them are very educated about what twice exceptional means for their child, but that doesn't always mean that they have the resources or the tools, especially when it comes to academics. And so as they're trying to support those kids, that can be really difficult for them to do at home. And I think that teachers have a lot of things on their plate and don't always think about what those 2E kids need. My older son has, a 504 plan, and how do you translate those accommodations online when part of what he needs is somebody who's checking in with him and making sure that he understands the directions, and because he likes to read the first step of the directions and then not any of the rest, and so that's been difficult. The other thing that I've noticed too is that a lot of my clients have a hard time with that cognitive flexibility. And so schoolwork is done at school, and some of those kids are very good about completing their work and getting it done at school so that they don't ever have any homework. Home is for home stuff. School is for school stuff. So now asking them to do school stuff at home has been a really difficult transition.
Well, I guess what I'm seeing, and I think this is something that will apply to 2E, but I think is going to apply to others as well, is for a lot of them, especially if ADHD is the diagnosis, the focus and the motivation, but then that feeds also into what a lot of us are feeling too, which is that screen fatigue. And so it's really hard to provide support for that when the only way that I really have to support you right now is through the thing that's probably making your life infinitely harder right now. I have a student who loves books and loves reading and always has a book in her lap, and me reading out loud to them over the computer is not enough. And she's very quickly saying, well, why does it have to be all online? And I can't just go back and say, well, they told us we have to, or it becomes really difficult. And we're there to support them and encourage them, but we're also sitting there and we're all in how many conferences a day and how many meetings and how many emails, and we're sitting there quietly, at least some of us, to ourselves going, yeah, I totally get what you're saying. I need a break from this too. My back, my eyes, my knees, like this screen fatigue is really making it hard. So I think that's exacerbating a lot of what our kids are struggling with. If we were with them, it would be a lot easier to find those accommodations. But when they need me, if they still have to go to a screen to get to me, that's adding to the problem. We are finding it interesting, though, on the flip side. Before all of this, we did a non-related study of iGen as a faculty, and we found a lot of our students were saying, we actually do feel more comfortable communicating digitally. If I have a problem, I would rather message you and not have to see your face or look at you when I say it, although I would be curious now to see, there's a little bit too much of a good thing. And now I'm wondering if for some of them that stance has changed, because that has become their primary mode of communication. And now they're probably wondering, well, maybe that whole in-person thing isn't so shabby after all. So it's been a very interesting dichotomy as to how the technology plays into that for 2E, but also not for 2E as well.
Some of our introverts have really enjoyed the at-home experience. Like you had mentioned earlier, they get to go at their own pace. They can, and some of our kids too, some of our ADHD kids I find are actually focusing better on the screen because they don't have other kids in the classroom distracting them. So there are pros and cons.
Yeah, I ran into one family. We were out on a trail, 6 feet apart, totally promise. And in true on-brand form for the son, he wasn't there because as mom said, well, he's 13 and being out on a family outing isn't going to work for him. But she said for him, it worked really well because he was finding that there was less, for him, busy work. For him, sometimes he doesn't want his brain to be overstimulated because that's when it kicks everything else into overdrive. So for him, it was nice to just have a clear set of expectations. He could do it at his own pace if he wanted to stay up super late and do it and then sleep in, unlike before where he would want to do that and then still have to be up and go to school in the morning. So for him, he can focus because he knows then he can check that off the list, move on with his life. And if he doesn't want to interact, and he's kind of glad for that.
I think that brings up something, which is that sometimes what we want is not actually what's best for us. And I do have some concern that we have students who are getting very entrenched in some really unhealthy and unhelpful habits. So I was really surprised. A friend of mine, I don't think she knows what I do for a living, so she shouldn't hear this, but she mentioned to me just offhand that her daughter, who's in high school and at a school that is doing work, like there is one school district near us that's basically doing nothing, but our district is still doing work. Anyway, I was talking with her one day, and it was late afternoon. Like I was getting ready to make dinner, and her daughter was just getting up because she's like staying up all night and then sleeping all day. And I think a lot of kids are like, because the schoolwork is taking less time for them for the most part, unless you have this beautiful structure like Lynn described, that they're still kind of there. But I think a lot of kids, especially our GT kiddos, they'll get through their work much more quickly. I mean, that's one of the huge benefits of real homeschooling is that the amount of time it takes. And I think a lot of our kids are really thriving in not having to deal with the kid who, didn't understand the first time the teacher explained it. And so the teacher has to explain it 6 more times, and they're not having to listen to that. Like they're just racing through and they're getting done with their work. But then what are they doing with that time? And I think a lot of things they're doing with that time are not helpful. I think there's probably too much video gaming, too much staying up late, too little gross motor exercise, too little vitamin N for nature, too little of a lot of things, and too much of more. And I would like to see a real evaluation. I hesitate to say this because I don't mean it to sound like a criticism of parents, but I will say that habits easily made are sometimes far less easily unmade. And I do worry that if we have this go on for essentially most of these kids, it was from March, and then they're going to probably stay this way until August, that if they stay in that way, that going back to school in August is going to be, it's going to be its own health crisis, right? And so I do think we need to think about how much benefit students derive from some kind of structure, even if it's a different structure, but just the idea that life is not a free-for-all now. It isn't just that you finish this work you had to do, and then the rest of the time you have to fill your life with whatever you want. I don't know, I'm uncomfortable with that. I think there's some tension between what kids want and what's good for them that's being exacerbated by this situation. And the other thing I think schools need to do is to consider, when we're delivering instruction this way, how can we analogize some of it? Like, how can we make some of it not on screen where kids are looking? Because we know that reading comprehension is not good on screen. So how can we have it be this way? So a school near us, a lot of the students don't have internet access. So they've been like printing out packets, and the parents drive by on Monday morning and they're handed the work. And I think that in some ways people are like, oh, that's so sad that they don't have internet. And I think, oh, in some ways those kids are way better off, because just because something's printed on paper doesn't mean it's just a boring worksheet. You can have high quality material that just happens to be printed on a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, and I say this full disclosure, I do not have children. And so for those of you that are working with children at home, hats off to you. But I guess for me, and I hear what you're saying, and I totally agree. And then I hear, I have a student whose mom is grocery store worker and she works overnights, or the number of kids whose parents are frontline healthcare workers and they're working insane hours. And I struggle with how do I support them in getting those things when those kids aren't getting those structures at home. And as much as, we try to instill those things in them, I teach sixth grade. We're still really trying to develop the front of the brain there to get them to, remember to wear their shoes when they show up to school. And so that's been a real struggle in that, when we don't hear from a kid for a while and we finally get a hold of them and they say, oh, well, it was okay, but, our internet was out, or my mom had to work a double and nobody was there to wake me up. And, we're now realizing that we had no idea that we needed to be proactive in teaching some of those skills, because we had no idea that those skills were going to become so prevalent so unexpectedly. And now we're kind of a little behind the eight ball in some of those things. And I know one of the things that you would consider talking about is how are things going to look different when this is all over? That's one of the things I would argue is that will have to look different, is like, this is some of those skills that have nothing to do with school themselves, but that suddenly kids have had this responsibility thrust on them. And it's not the fault of a parent or a kid or a student or a teacher or anything, but we had no idea we had to be responsible for these things. And that's a really difficult lesson to suddenly have to learn.
I think that's an important point, Meredith, and that we didn't even know all the skills that were going to be required, and now we do. And what do we do about it? Because we don't have control over a lot of those things. Someone mentioned to me, not really a friend, but an acquaintance who's a single mom, mentioned to me, this has made me decide that as much as I like living where I live, I need to move closer to my parents, because I need to be able to support these children, but at the same time, I can't. It's very hard if you're a single parent to be working and trying to facilitate education at the same time. And she's like, I'm going to have to move so that if this happens again, I'm not constantly feeling torn in 18 directions and feeling like a failure in every aspect of my life. So I think there are going to be a lot of hard conversations that people have to have within schools, within families, within extended families. What does it look like to support each other in a world that can be shut down at any moment?
One advantage that I've found from the parents being there with the children is the parents, for the first time for many of them, are seeing what their child is actually like in school. And it's been really, really helpful and eye-opening. And I find that I'm able to then work more closely with the parent from the same place, where we're working as a true team, because they can see, the issues, and it's helping me to understand the issues better as well, because I'm actually able to sit in on classes. I can just kind of watch, and it's almost like doing a really cool study. I'm studying how are the kids responding to certain teaching techniques, where I wouldn't just stand there if I were in the classroom. I mean, in the school, physical school, I wouldn't just walk in a room and just like stand there, So that would be a little awkward. But being able to watch, I'm learning a lot about what's working, what needs to be improved, how kids are responding to things. So in that way, I think based on, kind of the last question about how gifted ed will change, I think I personally am learning a lot about what can be improved. And I also think that we're learning how to utilize technology better, because we're forced to break maybe some sort of old habits that we might have with education. And there are some really cool resources out there. I know we're all getting them every day, but I mean, live museum tours and just so many things that I think gifted kids can really respond to, and then move away from the screen and do a project that's inspired by something they saw on the screen. And that's one thing that we also do. Like, we have the kids that whatever's going on, we really encourage them to now move away and work on something. And we've gotten pictures from parents of the kids where something's spread out across their whole bedroom floor and they're all into it and they're working on it. So it is for school, but it's not necessarily they're sitting there docile in front of the screen. So I think a lot of good can come. There can be some silver linings from all of this if we look for them.
One of the things that we're like our school staff is really hoping to see is parents becoming more empowered. Again, as a homeschool hybrid, the part of my job as director is to coach parents on how to homeschool as well. And the first few weeks they were like, are we doing enough? Like, this isn't going well. And just giving them an abundance of grace. So, like, you're loving on your kids. They're showing up for class. Like, we can tell that they're getting it. And I mean, we have the privilege of in the fall truly able to pick up where we left off academically, which that's not the reality for most learning environments. But I can truly tell the parents, it's okay. You are doing your best. Like, you're doing, and again, we're very fortunate. We have incredible families and they spend so much time with the kids. It's almost the opposite end of the spectrum in that they're like, how can we cram as much family time as we can in? It's like, no, let them play. It's okay. It's okay. And just, talking to a lot of parents, they are obviously thankful for teachers and school, but also thankful for the extra time at home and for the extra coaching they're getting from our staff. And here's ways to improve. And like you said, we're able to watch how the kids learn, and the parents are able to watch how their kids learn in a school setting. And I think that's really informative to them. And we're also able to give that freedom of, yeah, your kid can bounce on a bouncy seat, and that's okay. Because for a lot of parents that aren't in education and don't understand the implications of 2E, like, it can seem like, oh, they're distracted, or, oh, they're not paying attention. And sometimes when I'm working with my own daughter, I'm like, why aren't you paying attention? And then I have to take a step back and like go into teacher mode instead of mom mode. And I sense the struggle in the parents, but I also sense they're becoming way more confident in their ability to help their children. And I think that can be a thing all over, regardless of schooling situation, is parents taking control of how their kids learn and being their advocates. And because they're getting to see how they learn, they're going to be able to advocate for their children better in any educational situation.
I think one of the things too that I see happening is, along with what Meredith was saying, which is really focusing on some of those soft skills, maybe some that we really didn't realize how important they were, but that ability to self-regulate and prioritize and make those decisions. I think that that's going to be a big factor. And one of the very practical ways that I know that that's going to play out in my children's district is that starting next year, they're not going to do any snow days anymore. They're going to do virtual learning days. And I think that will be a transition, but you have to coach those kids on how to do those things. And ultimately, I think those are all really good skills, to teach kids to be independent learners and to be able to ask questions and, monitor some of those things.
Yeah. And we have something called advisory period we had it when we were physical and we have it now. And they have to go on an aside, in this format, they can't hide. They can't, they can't check out really because we can see them. And, it's been better that way. But they're learning how to open up their school management system, check out their schedule for the day, and kind of like really teaching them those executive functioning skills. And I feel like they're almost more focused in that area, which is, we'll see how that translates when we do come back.
Yeah. Any final thoughts about how we think gifted ed will change in the future? We've kind of touched on that as we have gone on, but I don't know if anyone else has other ideas. Lisa?
Well, I think that, as I mentioned earlier, that families will be having hard conversations. I think there are going to be a lot of gifted children who are going to enter into a season-long war waged to try to be homeschooled all the time. I think that a lot of them will realize, I have a lot more time, even though it's not truly homeschooling what we're doing, we're learning at home, but I think a lot of them will see the benefit of it. And I think a lot of our schools that don't necessarily serve gifted populations intentionally, right? They serve who shows up, but they don't necessarily serve them intentionally, are going to have to do a better job of serving them, because now both the kids and the families see, oh, wait, even though it wasn't exactly homeschooling could be even better, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're going to, public schools in general will have to up their game, I think, in if they're going to be, because now there's an alternative. And a lot of families are realizing, well, you know, even though it's hard, I am learning. Like Sarah said, you know, the parents are gaining skills as well. It's not just the kids who are gaining skills, it's the parents who are gaining skills. And so we're going to, like, from the school perspective, we're going to have to make sure that we are offering something that they either can't get at home, or that I'm hard pressed to think of something they couldn't get at home, but that we're offering a competitive alternative so that we have a value proposition, and our value proposition can no longer be, we know how to do this.
Well, I appreciate everyone's time and thoughts and feedback, and I'm really hopeful that this is useful for all of our audience who are educators and parents as well. And so thank you guys for participating, and good luck with all of the online learning.